So I must admit my testimony would probably sound extreme to most people. However, I do have to examine that fine line through my testimony. I may get off topic a few times. The word revolution, how one defines the term may differ greatly depending on their beliefs and the role of government. Common thread in the 21st century is that the term is usually invoked in honor and remembrance of the Revolutionary Wars. One reason I found the practices of the MIAC Center so appalling is that it is one of many, many sources attempting to lead patriotic dissent to violence. I've brought copies of an issue of Republic magazine that talks about several of these instances, and I have a copy for each member of the committee. It discusses it in great detail, in fact. Is this just another case of one man's perceived terrorist being another man's perceived freedom fighter? Or perhaps could there be other factors to determine whether or not rebellion could be righteous? It is a common belief that the Second Amendment was not created for hunting nor defending yourself against street hoodlums, but for communities to have the capability to respond to emergencies or invasion from forces outside of our laws. However, guns and violence are not the only solution, nor was it the solution in the 1770s. It became the final option when all other options were exhausted. The Declaration of Independence even states, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. The First Amendment is our channel. That's why we are here, to allow our grievances to be addressed. If the governing institutions do indeed operate under the consent of the governed, then Amendment number 1 would be sufficient, and the threat of rebellious violent extremism would not be valid. As Martin Luther King Jr. and later President John F. Kennedy both uttered a quote that so perfectly describes the urgency of our founding fathers, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. One common theme among all of the demographics profiled in these several reports, this was mentioned before, is the belief that government has been physically resisting revolutionary-type changes or a restoration of God-given liberties ensured by the blood of our original patriots. When these demographics turn extreme or violent, should we not examine their motive? Surely not all cases are driven by active tyranny, but what of passive tyranny? In my short 2 years of activism, I find one common response: apathy. Whether it's your average person who buys into the belief that corruption is so rampant that the only change can be a slow one, and they must continue to support a lesser of evils, or it is the most radical extremist who believes government must be changed however the cost, and that the legal channels to do so have been monopolized by corrupt bureaucracies and political advantage, so they feel the only option that remains is violence. I argue that an overwhelming majority of the people have lost all hope and faith that the government could ever again be an institution of the people. It is my belief that inside this room are the people who still believe that when reminded of the duty, when reminded of checks and balances, and when reminded that the state created the federal government and that the people created the states for that task, that the government, the Constitution, the belief that the First Amendment precedes the Second Amendment when tyranny is perceived, all of these structures can be restored to their proper roles of functionality. My argument here is that adult free-thinking peoples being watched by adults following orders is not a way to prevent crime nor extremism. Instead, it is an escalation on the idea that government can operate outside of certain boundaries when it needs to, but the people must be presumed potentially guilty until proven innocent. At every rights violation, we're told that there is nothing to hide, there is nothing to fear, and in the next breath told that some government policies must be kept a secret for national security reasons. Since when did the Fourth Amendment right to be secure from warrantless nosing only apply to the government? Nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Should I mention that ignorance of the law is no excuse for lawlessness? So while thousands of pages of laws, rules, regulations, statutes, procedures, resolutions, executive orders, signing statements, court precedents, and court orders for the people to follow are instituted every single day, how is one person ever to know that by performing the innocent tasks of a daily life, they are not incriminating themselves? My digression brings me to my last point. With the source documentation of these reports being private entities and organizations with their own freedom to utilize their own First Amendment rights, to target and label groups with terms like hate speech or hate group. Being hateful is also protected by the Constitution, and it is not proper for government to make such judgment, except in extreme cases of violence or crime, not perceived potential thereof, based on their legal behaviors. To believe that we could ever end rebellious mentality through further authoritarianism or end hate speech through a hateful reaction is as absurd as bombing for peace. I ask the committee to consider your role in a free society and your ability to cure the apathetic, to stop the extremism before it starts by refusing to legislate in any manner that would violate your oath to the United States or Missouri Constitution and close any other government institution that would operate outside those boundaries. Thank you.